Should the New York Giants play their starters against the Jets this weekend? I'm going to give you the pros, the cons, and what I think they're going to do. Coming up next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. And we thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And if you made us your first listen of the day, we appreciate that as well. Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com to get half off. That's 50% off your first year. All right, Giant fans, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, first off, happy Friday to everybody. On today's show, we're going to take a look at the debate. Should the New York Giants play their starters against the Jets this weekend? Now, I have some ideas on what I think is going to happen, so I'm going to outline that for you, but I'm also going to give you the pros and cons of playing the starters versus not playing the starters. So we'll talk about that first. Then in segment 2, I have a couple of very early roster predictions I want to make regarding injured guys. You know, I keep getting questions about certain injured guys, who's going to be ready, who's going to land on IR, who's going to go back to PUP. Spoiler alert, nobody's going on PUP. So we'll talk about that, and I'll break that down for you. And then we'll close things out in segment 3 with an interview I did with Mike Sando of The Athletic. Mike Sando is out with his annual quarterback rankings. Didn't really have the Giants quarterback situation ranked very high. And I asked him about how it was determined and, you know, some questions in general about the rankings and the Giants quarterback situation. So that will close out today's show. Again, welcome on in. Let's get into it. All right. The starter plan, as it were. Should the Giants play the starters against the Jets? In my opinion, it can't hurt. Okay. This is a team, like I have said so many times before, they need all the reps they can get because they are not exactly a juggernaut. That being said, what I think is going to happen based on history, based on how Brian Daboll, who, by the way, would not answer any questions about what he is planning to do. Why? I have the foggiest idea. I mean, it's preseason. Who cares what the outcome of the game is as long as people come out healthy? But that's stable for you. But anyway, I have some thoughts about what I think he's going to do. So let's talk first about the pros. Obviously, you know, you want to see continued work on tackling, see the quarterbacks getting used to the cadence, especially with a pass rush coming at them. The starters last week against the Buffalo Bills in the preseason opener, they had what, 12 plays on offense? Not a whole lot. The defense had a few more snaps. I forget exactly how many it was, but not a whole lot. So it can't hurt to certainly put the starters out there for another week. You know, I don't see too much of a downside. You know, some people will say, well, there's the injury risk. Well, you know, as I've said so many times before, folks, injuries don't discriminate. They can happen anytime, any place, anywhere, on any surface. And we have seen that time and again in training camp. Now, the reason why I don't think Daboll is going to play the starters this week basically follows the trend that he has established since he has become head coach. And that is, if the team has a joint practice that is particularly productive and particularly physical, such as what the Giants had against the Jets on the 2 days this week, on Tuesday and Wednesday, he doesn't play the starters. The thought process being workload management. All right. So, for example, you know, you watch the drills and you see Russell Wilson and the starters, for example, they're getting the bulk of the reps. Then the second team offense is getting the second most reps, and then so on down the line. So ultimately, because you don't want to wear the guys out, especially given, that the two practices, the joint practices were conducted in the heat, they were physical, they were productive. So you say, okay, you know what? We'll give you guys the night off, but we'll see you the following week. And that kind of leads into the next point as to what I think the Giants are going to do. The Giants, like I said, when they have joint practices that are productive, they don't play the starters. There is no way that the Giants would have played the starters. Let's say even if they played the starters this week, there was no way they were going to play them the following week. Not with, a quick turnaround. You've got the game against the Jets on Saturday. Then on Thursday, you've got a game against the Patriots. So you're not playing the starters both nights. Okay. Now, what I would do and what I think makes sense, if you want to give the starters a week off, this is the weekend to do it. You have them come back for the preseason finale. And the reason for that is your first game is September 7th, right? You don't want to have your starters go almost a whole month without any football activity, right? I'm talking game activity. I'm not talking practice activity. Because here's the other thing, folks. Let's just kind of look at the calendar if we can and kind of gauge where the practices are going to be, all right? So I'm going to just pull up a calendar here so I have the dates correct. Okay, so the Giants on August 14th, which is the day I'm recording this, they had a walkthrough, all right? The 15th, Friday, they're going to have a walkthrough. The game is on the 16th. The players are off the 17th and the 18th. Okay. They're back to practice, I think, on the 19th. I don't anticipate that's going to be a padded practice. I think that's going to probably be a light practice. They have a walkthrough on the 20th. Then they have the Patriots on the 21st. The 22nd through the 24th are off. That's kind of required, I think, by the way the league schedule is set up. Then on the 25th, I don't know if they're going to have a full practice. They might have like a little gathering or a corrections type of deal. The 26th now becomes your cut down day. All right. So I don't think they're going to have players in to practice on the 26th when they have cut down. So that means the 27th, the 28th, and the 29th, there's a chance there's practices. And maybe there's a padded practice in there. I don't know. We haven't gotten the schedule that far ahead, but there's going to be at least, I would think, one. Then they're off, obviously, the 30th and the 31st, which is a Saturday and a Sunday. And that brings us right into the first week of the regular season on September 1st, when you figure there'll be maybe a padded practice on September 3rd. So the whole point of this exercise is to kind of illustrate what the projected practice schedule is going to be. And you're going to want to have guys, stay sharp. You don't want your starters to kind of just sit back and that's it. We'll see you in September, as the song goes. So I'm curious to see if that's what Brian Daboll does. Again, I think that's what he's going to do. He's going to look at workload management, hold some guys out. Some starters weren't going to play anyway. Malik Neighbors, for example, you're not going to see him the preseason regardless. But it's important that they get at least one more game in, even if it's just for a quarter or another series, get at least one more game in where they get some tune-up snaps, if you will, for the regular season. Because the last thing we want, obviously, is for them to come out and looking flatter than day-old soda pop. All right. Coming up next, folks, we're going to talk about a couple of potential roster moves, I should say, what I think is going to happen involving three injured players, if actually. So that's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever having to touch a spreadsheet. Monarch has made it so simple for me to review my finances with my husband that we can both see our budgets, our goals, and our spending activity all in one place. So don't let the financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com to get half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And still to come on Locked On Giants. Obviously, the Giants play the Jets on Saturday night. Now, for the wrap-up show, what I'm actually going to do for the wrap-up show, I'm going to tape that Sunday morning. And the reason why I'm going to tape it Sunday morning is I'm going to have Emery Hunt on with me. Emery Hunt from Football Game Plan and CBS Sports. Now, Emery has been at all the Giants practices, as have I. Emery will also, be at the game, I believe, on Saturday night. So we're going to break down all of what we've seen, kind of hedge our bets as to how certain roster battles are shaping up, and just kind of, break everything down for you like we always do try to do here on the Locked On Giants podcast. So that's coming up on Saturday. And then, like I said, the Giants with a quick turnaround Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then the game on Thursday with the New England Patriots. So we're going to just keep rolling right along. And at some point next week, I am going to do a 53-man roster projection show. I know a lot of you have asked me about that, and I want to get a full feel, see 3 preseason games worth before I really sit down and tackle that. So that's what's coming up here on Locked On Giants. Now, let's talk about the roster, specifically injured players. And I've gotten a lot of questions from you guys and gals about certain players. And we're going to start with Andrew Thomas, the left tackle. A lot of you are like, what is the story with Andrew Thomas? Is he going to be on the field? What's happening? Folks, what I think is going to happen with Andrew Thomas, I believe the goal is to try and get him activated sometime next week. Not necessarily before the Patriots game, but maybe thereafter. And the goal there would be to allow for Andrew Thomas to spend the following week or two leading up to the season to get ready, to get reacclimated with his fellow offensive linemen, to get used to the cadence of Russell Wilson, right? Because Thomas hasn't had that opportunity. So I think that is what they are aiming for. Now, that being said, the question is that foot fully ready to go? Now, the Giants, they have been absolutely tight-lipped about that foot and where Thomas is in his rehab. You would like to think he is at the tail end of his rehab. But at what point do you say, okay, you're done, clean bill of health, go out there? Because when it comes to that particular injury, it was a Liz Frank injury, sometimes it could take over a year for the foot to fully feel the right way. So they've been rehabbing Andrew Thomas. He was out on the field during Wednesday's practice with the Jets, but he was standing on the sideline, and he seemed to be walking fine and whatnot. But you've got to remember, he also has to push off of that foot and do resistance work off of that foot. And that's where they want to be absolutely certain that he could do that. Now, from what I have seen from my time at the practices, Andrew Thomas has done jogging, some sprinting on the side with a trainer. He has done some resistance work. So as far as I can tell, and again, disclaimer, I am not a doctor. I have not finished my medical degree. But to my eyes, he's looked like he has come out just fine. Doing it real time and, in a football game against another human being, especially when your foot can potentially be stepped on, that's another story. But I do think that ultimately the Giants want to have him activated off PUP. Certainly they will have him off of PUP, by the time the roster, the 53-man roster has to be set. Now, will Andrew Thomas necessarily be ready for the start of the season? That's the question I don't quite have an answer for. Could I see a scenario where maybe he's inactive the first week? I could. I don't think that will happen, but I could see the scenario. And for those of you wondering, if for whatever the reason the Giants were to keep Andrew Thomas on PUP, he would have to miss the first 4 games of the season. He would not count against the 53-man roster. He would have to miss the first 4 games of the season. I do not think they want to go there. So Andrew Thomas, I feel pretty confident in saying that he's going to be activated sooner than later. I don't know if it's going to be before the Patriots game or after. I think it's going to be after, but we'll have to see exactly when they, flip the switch on that, if you will. Now, the other player that I'm kind of curious to see what the Giants do with is running back Cam Skattebo. Cam Skattebo had that setback. Again, it was never confirmed, but it is believed that he has the hamstring. And you all know that hamstrings take a while to heal. If you rush back, you will have a setback. Well, Cam Skattebo had a setback. So what I think is going to happen with Cam Skattebo, and first, let me just say, some of you said, well, will they put him on PUP? No, the answer is no. You cannot put a player who passed his training camp physical on the PUP list. If he gets injured, he either goes IR or you carry him. So don't even think about PUP at this point. All right. The only guys right now who are eligible to stay on PUP are Thomas and running back Eric Gray. I think Eric Gray is going to start the season on PUP, by the way, because there's been like no sign of him potentially being ready. But let's get back to Skattebo. What I think is going to happen with Skattebo is he could end up on IR with a designation to return. Now, remember, the NFL instituted a rule, I think it was a couple years ago, might have been even last year. I don't remember exactly when it was, but teams can now designate 2 guys at the roster cutdown date, the 53-man roster cutdown date. Teams can designate 2 guys to hit IR who are designated to return, right? Whereas in the past, if you put a guy on IR before the 53-man roster was set, that was it. He was gone for the year. They changed that rule to allow up to 2 guys to come back at some point. I think it's a minimum of 4 weeks, and then you can open up a 21-day window and decide whether or not to activate him or leave him on IR. So that's what I think is going to happen with Cam Skattebo. And in a way, that might not be bad. And I say that not only because Skattebo has missed a lot of time between the spring and also, the summer, but you put him on IR with a designation to return. That now opens a roster spot for Dante Miller to make the roster, right? So you can get Dante Miller onto the roster, and then when Skattebo is ready, you see where you're at with regards to other injuries. Do you have a spot for him? Do you not have a spot for him? Maybe you make a roster move. Maybe you've got a quarterback, for example, that, you can put on IR, or, you cut somebody because they're not living up to their performance and you get Skattebo onto the roster that way. So that's a possibility to consider. But that's what I think is going to happen with Skattebo. I think he's going to go on IR. I think he's going to be designated to return. And like I said, it's going to be a 4-week period for him to really get that injury, whatever it is. And again, I think it's a hamstring, get that injury up and running and finally taken care of once and for all. So that's what I see for Skattebo. Now, Malik Neighbors, here's the thing, I've been talking about this quite a bit. I do not think Malik Neighbors will go on IR. I don't see that at all. What I do see, obviously, the Giants are going to try and manage that injury as best as they can. Can they get him through the season? I sure hope so. Because look, he's going to take pounding on that foot when he plays. And it's interesting because I went back and I looked it up last year, and I believe the first sign of the toe was late in the season. And I want to say it was the Colts game. And I think that was the game where Malik Neighbors actually had over 100 yards receiving in that game. So he can play through it. He's shown that he's tough and he can tolerate the pain and play through it. But the more pounding that toe takes, the more you've got to wonder, is he going to make it through the season? I think they're going to do everything they can to get him through the season. I think he wants to get through the season, but obviously if he's out there and he was practicing early and they pulled him back because something got aggravated, you got to weigh the risks and say, okay, are we going to make this injury worse to where now surgery becomes a necessity as opposed to an option? So that's what they all have to weigh. And again, I don't know where Neighbors is in his rehab, other than Daboll keeps saying he's getting better, he's improving, yada, yada, yada. But that's what you need to consider with Malik Neighbors. And the Giants, they tend to be overly cautious and conservative with how they treat these injuries. So hopefully they will, whatever their plan is for Malik Neighbors, it's a solid plan and it gets him through the season, and hopefully that he doesn't need surgery at any point. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, we're going to hear from Mike Sando of The Athletic, who's going to talk about his new ranking of the league's 32 quarterbacks, why Russell Wilson was put towards the bottom, or at least in the bottom, one of the bottom tiers. So he's going to talk about that with us coming up right after this. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. This year, I'm going to play on Yahoo Fantasy, and I hope you will as well, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. Whether you're all in on something new or you like sticking to head-to-head leagues or jumping into public leagues, Yahoo has you covered. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout the month of August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. So stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and now joining me here on the Locked On Giants podcast is Mike Sando. He is a senior NFL writer for The Athletic. He is out this week with his annual quarterback rankings, and not a very good ranking for the New York Giants situation, but we're going to talk about that because, I guess until further proven otherwise, the Giants quarterback situation is going to be a big question mark. First, Mike, thank you so much for joining me here on the program.
It's great to be here, Patricia. Thanks for having me, and happy to go through whatever questions you got.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's do it because I have some questions. So, Mike, tell the listeners, if you will, how these rankings kind of came about. What was the process in gathering the data and then figuring out where to slot each quarterback?
Sure. So this is my 28th year of covering the NFL and 12th year of doing this quarterback tiers project. The definition for each tier were kind of agreed upon between me and a bunch of coaches and executives over the years. They've been honed a little bit, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Tier 1's the best. Tier 5 wouldn't even be a starter. So in between, we can kind of figure it out. If you're interested in details, you can certainly see it on the site, or I can explain it to you. Then from there, basically, I wait till after the draft is over to know all the quarterback landscape, right? Who drafted somebody in the top 5 or whatever, that'll affect it. We exclude all the rookies. We take all the veterans who are starters or could start. So, in some places that's two people, like in Indianapolis, you'd have Anthony Richardson. I forget who the other quarterback is there. You may remember who that is. Former Giants quarterback Daniel Jones. And then I go about, reaching out to people that I know in the league. This year we've got 6 GMs, 6 assistant GMs, 6 former GMs working in other types of roles. We got 5 other high-level executives. We have 8 head coaches, 19 assistants, 15 of the 19 are coordinators, and we'll go through the ballot. They'll put each one into a tier. We'll talk about it, either in person or on the phone, and we get a composite ranking that maybe none of the 50 voters agree with exactly how it came out, but the result is a product of all of their insights and opinions.
All right. Now, let's get to Russell Wilson's ranking because he was the one who represented the Giants quarterback room. Russell Wilson ranked in tier 4, which I guess is a guy that won't ideally start all 17 games. I guess there's some concern
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of
Yeah.
curious about that ranking because you have other guys on this list that were higher, like for example, Tua of Miami, Stafford, who's dealing with the back issue of the Rams. He was in tier 1. So I'm kind of curious about that because it just seems like the injury factor might be I don't know if it's consistent or not. So I wonder if you can clarify
Yeah.
that for me.
Yeah. So I think it feels like ideally wouldn't play the whole season means because we don't think you're good enough to go the whole year. You're sort of a high quality backup, right? Or you're a bridge quarterback, somebody you might come in. Certainly, if Stafford's healthy or Tua's healthy, they're going to be the quarterback the whole season for those teams, either through the contract that Tua has or the fact that they have a top 5 offense whenever he plays, top 10. And then Stafford certainly is a proven starter, been to the Super Bowl recently, had his team knocking on the door to maybe beat Philly in the divisional round last year. So those guys are in a totally different category. Russell Wilson, it's not over an injury concern. It's the fact that people think that the one thing that made him truly special, just his elusiveness, his ability to make plays and create, has left him at this age. And so you're left with a guy who doesn't really do anything special, maybe has a really good deep ball, but isn't an electric player. And then also without his ability to move around like he used to, isn't just going to slice and dice it from the pocket. So he's right at the top of tier 4. You could make a case he's a low 3. The difference would be a low 3 is a starting quarterback in the league, but you better have a good defense. You better have a good run game. We're not going to want to put it on him very much. That could be Russell Wilson. I think he got 25 votes into tier 3. So half the panel thinks he's a low level starter. And the other half think his best days are behind him. And he probably, maybe if you drafted somebody like Jackson Dart, maybe you want to look at him before the season's over rather than go with Russell the whole way.
Mike, how much did the supporting cast have a role in the determination of the different tiers?
I think it has a role. Like for example, Jalen Hurts is a Super Bowl MVP, Super Bowl winner, comes in tied for 9th because people think he's good. He's in tier 2, but people don't think he's a tier 1 player like Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson. They think that those guys you could have them carry more of the burden of the offense. Whereas Jalen Hurts, maybe he can make some plays. He's definitely good on a good team, but there's a reason why they want to hand the ball off to Saquon Barkley, or maybe even without Saquon Barkley, they wouldn't want to just load up Hurts too much. So that's where the supporting cast can come in. I think last year Lamar Jackson didn't have as good of a defense. His kicker was really bad for a lot of the year, and he was keeping the team in shootouts. So a little bit of a diminished supporting cast maybe helped him because he showed he could do it. Whereas Brock Purdy, his supporting cast fell off. They went 6-11. So he didn't really show he's a tier 1 guy who could overcome that. He was more of a low tier 2.
With Russell Wilson, I mean, I know last year with the Steelers, he had some ups and downs, but he still helped get them to the playoffs. So, I mean,
Uh-huh.
how much does something like that factor into the rankings, do you think?
Well, people would look at what they did last season and say, well, they were 4-2 with Justin Fields, who wasn't very good, and they had a couple good games with Russell Wilson, but for the most part, they're winning with their defense, which is the strength of that team. So nobody came out of last season saying Russell Wilson was a key to them getting to the playoffs. If the Steelers thought that, they probably would have tried to re-sign him more.
Right, right. Now, in terms of, Russell Wilson's fit with the Giants,
Mm-hmm.
I think we can agree he is a bridge quarterback. He's only here on a 1-year deal. But that being said, is this potentially a better fit for him to where maybe if things fall into place, given, the having Malik Neighbors, the defense, which I'm sure is going to help out a lot. is this a situation where maybe Russell Wilson can recapture some of the magic, maybe move up in the rankings, or is it too soon to tell in your opinion?
I think that would be a big surprise at this age. In 2020, Russell Wilson was a unanimous tier one quarterback, and he's fallen every year since. So I think that's the clear trend. It's possible that, the Giants, I think, will be good on defense, just like Pittsburgh was. So that will help. It means you won't have to have him winging the ball all over the place. You also know that throughout his career, he's made some plays sometimes in the 2 minute drill. So that give him some credit for that. But I just don't think that there's an expectation that he's not joining a team that's so good that he's gonna, uh, have him be the 3 seed in the NFC. I don't think anyone's seeing that. I think it's much more likely that uh, we get to a certain point later in the year, mid-year, and they reassess and decide, hey, is it time to play Jackson Dart just to get a look at him?
Do you think that will happen? That if the season, as we go along, at some point, maybe Brian Daboll has it in his head that okay, we've got to flip the page. Russell's not our long-term starter. Is it a case of as long as the Giants are winning and Russell's looking halfway decent, that maybe he does finish the season?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. I think they have to assess as an organization, as a coaching staff, where they're at. Is everyone on the same page? Does Brian Daboll late in the year feel like, hey, to save my job, we have to think that we have to show that Jackson Dart can be the guy. All those things are to be determined. I think that's a conversation at some point for John Mara and Joe Shane and Brian Daboll and whoever else to just sort of figure out what's best for everybody and what's best for the organization. And is Jackson Dart ready? You don't want to put him in if he's not ready. And sometimes guys are best off sitting a year.
Yeah, very true. I mean, and then just real quick, Mike, I know he wasn't part of the ranking factor, but Jackson Dart, based on what you've,
Mm-hmm.
seen, heard about him, does this kid have future franchise quarterback written all over him based on the sample size, albeit small at this point, but based on what we've seen and what we know? Does he have franchise quarterback written all over him?
I don't think it's written all over him. I think it's a very tough market. We've seen guys get chewed up in the New York market. I mean, Geno Smith, Sam Darnold have had revivals elsewhere. Maybe Daniel Jones is going to have one too. We'll see. It's a tough place, not for everybody. And so I think that really remains to be seen whether he is. And most people I think that I talk to think he's going to need some time, that he's not ready early on. And so, you can bet one thing once he gets in there, it's going to be evaluated by everybody as if it's got to happen quickly, and that may not be fair to him.
All right, Mike, appreciate the time, appreciate the feedback. He is Mike Sando of The Athletic. You can check out his work over there. He has all 32 quarterback situations ranked. The Giants did not land in the bottom. I think that there was only one team in the bottom. I won't spoil it, but I think a lot of people could probably figure it out. Mike, thanks again for coming on with me, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the preseason.
You too. All right, Giant fans, that is going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Hope you enjoyed the program. And I want to thank you for another great week here on Locked On Giants. Now, for your next listen, why not check out Locked On Bets? Betting experts Lee Sterling and Kevin Rodgers have daily MLB locks and can't miss football futures. Find Locked On Bets on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, I will see you again on Sunday morning. Again, my guest will be Emery Hunt of CBS Sports and Football Game Plan as we break down the Giants preseason game against the New York Jets. We hope to see you then.